Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, I've got 3 disturbing true Halloween horror stories, all based on real incidents. I think you're really going to get into these ones. If you enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like button, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I always love reading those. And if you're new around here, don't forget to subscribe. I post stories like this all the time, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Alright, let's not waste any more time. Let's get into tonight's chilling stories. It was a calm, bright morning, and I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee and the newspaper. Reading outside had always been my ritual before the day began. Something about the quiet air and early light woke me up better than any caffeine ever could. I was halfway through the local section, browsing stories about small-town politics and community complaints, when I noticed movement at the end of the stone walkway. Standing there was a little girl. She wore a plain white dress, and a thin white veil hung down over her face, hiding it completely. At first, I thought she was part of a neighbor's game, or maybe had wandered over from one of the houses nearby. But the longer I looked, the stranger she appeared. The rising sun behind her made her outline look faded, almost like she was a photograph that didn't belong in the present moment. The effect unsettled me deeply. I called out, asking if she was lost or needed help finding her parents. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she tilted her head and spoke softly. "It's not Halloween yet," she said. "Halloween is tomorrow. I'm just trying on my outfit." Her words didn't make sense. It was July, the middle of summer. I was wearing shorts and sandals, and she was talking about Halloween. I asked if she was sure she wasn't lost, offered to help her find her parents. Instantly, her posture changed. She stiffened, stepped back, and shouted that I wasn't to touch her, threatening that her father would hurt me if I did. The panic in her tone startled me. I stopped where I was. Before I could say another word, she turned and bolted down the sidewalk. I stood there for a long while, not sure what I had just witnessed. Something about her appearance, that washed-out, unreal look, stayed in my mind for the rest of the day. A month passed. One evening, while cleaning out the attic, I found a small wooden box tucked under a pile of old blankets. It wasn't mine, probably something left behind by a previous owner. I opened it and saw a collection of faded Polaroid photographs. The first one I picked up showed a little girl playing in a pile of autumn leaves, smiling wide at the camera. She looked happy. In the background, half hidden behind the trees, was a light blue sedan. A dark figure sat inside, barely visible through the window. The image made me uneasy, but I tried to brush it off as coincidence. The next picture showed the same girl again, this time at a local park. Her mother seemed to be pushing her on a swing. I recognized the place. It was a park I'd taken my niece to a few times. And again, in the far corner of the image, the same blue sedan, the same shadowy figure behind the wheel, facing in the girl's direction. I was starting to feel an edge of discomfort. I looked through the stack until another photograph stopped me cold. It was the same girl again, standing at the edge of a walkway, the walkway leading to my porch. She wore a white dress and a thin veil over her face. The colors were faded and grainy, the whole scene looking decades old. Behind her, almost out of frame, sat the same blue sedan. The figure inside was turned toward the child. The faint curve of his mouth was visible. I felt an immediate chill. That car, I had seen it before, idling in the same spot across from my house on quiet evenings. I hadn't paid much attention then, but now the recognition made my stomach twist. At that moment, a knock came from downstairs. The suddenness of it made my heart leap. I shoved the box back under the blankets and hurried down, switching on every light as I went. When I opened the door, no one was there. The street was empty. I told myself it was just neighborhood kids playing a prank. I closed the door, but before it latched, I caught sight of a blue sedan parked at the far end of the street. As I stepped forward to get a better look, it rolled away slowly and vanished around the corner. That night, I barely slept. Weeks passed again, and soon it was the end of October. The uneasiness had faded some, though the memory of that morning still surfaced from time to time. On the night before Halloween, I lay in bed, trying to fall asleep. The house was quiet. My phone rang suddenly, startling me. I answered, tried to sound calm. A hollow voice came through the line. "Trick or treat." The words sent a wave of dread through me. Before I could respond, another voice, smaller, familiar, spoke right after. "It's not Halloween yet. Halloween is tomorrow. I'm just trying on my outfit." My hands trembled. I couldn't speak. The first voice came back. "Really? Then I'll come back later." I hung up the phone, breathing hard. My mind felt scattered, my body tense. I grabbed my shoes, determined to drive to the police station. But before I could leave the room, there was a knock, soft, deliberate, from the bathroom door beside my bed. The same hollow voice came again, this time just beyond the door. "Trick or treat." It was as though the air had been sucked out of the room. I bolted for the hallway, nearly falling as I ran down the stairs. Every sound in the house seemed too loud. The creak of the steps, the thud of my feet, until I reached the front door and yanked it open. Cold night air rushed in. I stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind me, shaking, trying to steady my breathing. And there she was. The same girl in the white dress stood on the porch, the veil still covering her face. For a long, suspended moment, neither of us moved. Then she reached out toward me. Her hand slipped from beneath the sleeve of her dress and closed around my wrist. It wasn't the small, delicate hand of a child. It was pale, rigid, and raw, the touch of something that had no warmth left in it. That was the last time I ever saw her. I had just moved to my current flat in Rains Park, southwest London, and was still fairly unfamiliar with the area. Now, my current bosses and supervisors know that I am still fighting the losing battle with the underwhelming reliability of Southwest trains, and as a result of less than reliable timekeeping when it comes to arriving to work on time. A battle I had hoped to circumvent with the purchase of a bicycle. Sadly, though, all too often the London weather and my inherent idleness jointly conspire to once again force me to take the trains to and from work. While some people are more than aware that the trains keep me from arriving at work on time, not many of you are aware of the troubles I have returning home. That is to say, I have many a time found myself stuck at Clapham Junction with no train to take me back to Rains Park. In these circumstances, I have to take a bus to Wimbledon Common and walk the remaining 3 miles on foot. It is actually quite a pleasant walk. London doesn't have many hills. If I walk along the Ridgeway, you can actually occasionally catch a nice view. True, it is of Croydon, but a nice view nonetheless. Now, to call Wimbledon Village a privileged area would be an understatement. The driveways are home to sports cars and luxury utility vehicles, so you can imagine I have very uneventful walks home. I rarely see anyone on the trip about from the odd older couple, perhaps walking home after a late dinner party, or even a person walking their dog. The neighborhood is quiet, and it gets to bed early. And that night was just like the others, initially. I had gotten off the bus at the War Memorial, walked through the village center, and turned onto the Ridgeway. My phone's batteries had died somewhere between Wandsworth and Southfields, so I had to do the walk without music, and this always made the walk seem longer. My usual practice was to walk along and look at the houses, try and guess what the people that lived in the houses would be like. Fast car business types, SUV and toys still in the front yard, larger family, that kind of thing. I was playing my game and decided to have a cigarette, so I stopped. I was searching for my lighter and looking around when I noticed that I was not the only one on the street. Now this was unusual, but hardly alarming. What was strange, however, was that the person wasn't the sort I had grown used to seeing. It was a young lady. She appeared to be drunk, or tired perhaps. I light my cigarette and pause for a second. Just a quick second to judge if she would be capable of making it home by herself. Or perhaps maybe she would need me to see if I could call someone for her. It was at this point I realized that she was crying. I started to walk over to her to make sure she was all right. She stopped walking immediately, frozen. I noticed she was in some sort of Halloween costume, a schoolgirl in fact. And as I got closer, I began to realize that she was in fact around the age of 15 to 16. She was deathly white. Her makeup must have been professionally done, or she had spent an incredibly long time preparing it. I began to decide that perhaps her friends had made fun of her costume, and she had run off from whatever party she had been at, drunk and upset. I began to start feeling a bit unnerved when I noticed that she was staring directly at me as I approached. I can assure you that in a city the size of London, we have an unspoken rule of avoiding eye contact with strangers at all costs. It was at this point I assumed she was under the influence of something other than alcohol, and I decided to be a bit more cautious. I stopped about 4 or 5 feet away and spoke to her. "Are you okay? You seem a little upset. Are you in any sort of trouble?" Nothing from her apart from that stare. "Have you had a little too much to drink? Maybe some smoke?" "You're right. I know hallucinogens when I see them. Still nothing. You need a taxi home. Do you remember where you live?" At this the girl began to cry again, but this time she was absolutely wailing. I could feel her raw sense of despair. I actually flinched at the sound. It was positively unbearable. She was dancing on the border of hysterics, perhaps even putting one foot along the line to see what would happen. I was stunned. I wanted to console her and run in equal measures. I wanted to comfort her and chastise at the same time. All I managed was a meek, "Why are you crying?" She must have heard me somehow, because she began to draw herself back from the edge of what can only be described as complete breakdown. She was still heaving and sobbing, but once again she brought her eyes up to mine and said very softly, "Because you are going to die. Now, I have been unfortunate enough to witness death firsthand on more than one occasion. Suffice it to say, these events had always left me with a lot to think about, and I in fact had come to terms with my own mortality quite early in life. It struck me that perhaps, like too many of us had, this young lady had someone quite close to her die recently. Perhaps she was going through the same dark realizations that follow being in the company of death, the same thoughts that can keep children up at night, and the pews full at churches. I wanted to let her know that everything would be fine, and that death was simply a part of life. All I managed, however, was a slightly incredulous, "I know." At this she seemed slightly taken back, almost angry. She responded, "You are going to die, and he is going to kill you." Alarms went off in my head. I began to feel more than a little threatened. I decided right there and then that talking this girl down from whatever bad height she was on was no longer my responsibility. Had not the venerable Hunter S. Thompson himself warned us of the dangers of underestimating the ability of a drug to take control of the person? Good luck, I said, and with that, turned and began to walk away. After about 5 steps, I quickly looked back to see her still standing there. She put her head down and began to audibly sob again. I quickened my pace and shortly had walked along a natural bend in the road, leaving her out of sight. I had been left agitated. I remember putting my headphones back in my ears and trying to listen to music from my phone, only to remember it was out of power still. I was still 2 miles away from home, but at the pace I was walking, I was confident I could cover the ground in less than 20 minutes. No less than 2 minutes later was when I first heard the shouting. It was a man's voice, and layered within it was an excruciating sense of malice and rage. "I am coming for you." I couldn't quite place where the voice had come from, but it seemed as though he was at some distance behind me, on the same road, possibly from where the girl had been. I immediately realized that I was to be the victim of some sort of Halloween prank. I didn't, however, slow down. I imagined that this was the point when I was supposed to get scared and begin to run, and I was determined not to play along. Again the man yelled, yet this time it seemed to come from significantly closer. "I hate you." Now the voice had seemed to have come from somewhere quite close behind me. That is to say, at that volume I would have expected to have seen the man addressing me. But I was still very much alone on the street. I was also walking quite fast, so the person yelling at me must have run quite fast. Yet I had not heard any other footsteps. There was obviously more than one prankster, and they had hidden along points on the street. I quickly decided to be rather a poor sport and cut off the main road down Thornton Road at the Swan Pub. I hate to admit that their practical joke had gotten the better of me, and I did not want to see what they had in store for me next. I had made it to the front of the second house on the street when that terrible voice shouted at me again, "You are going to die." This time the voice seemed to have come from the entrance of the street, less than 80 feet away. Perhaps a last chance at scaring me before I disappeared into the darker side streets. Since these streets were darker, I decided that I would lose no pride in starting to jog down the hill. I knew it was all probably fun and games, but the ferocity of the shouting left me worried that I could in fact be dealing with a real maniac. True, it would have been interesting to be a part of the most elaborate mugging I had ever heard of, but that voice just left me with the impression of true hatred. I didn't want to meet the person, or people rather, that could mimic and channel such malignant feelings at will. I had made it to the curve where Thornton Road becomes Thornton Road when all of a sudden, "I will kill you." This time the voice, the same voice that yelled, seemed to be directly to my right. He must have been hidden behind the fence of some house, or perhaps even hidden within the house. I had obviously walked right into their trap. I broke into a sprint at this point. Pride be damned. I began to run quite fast, and then faster straight downhill. At this point, I was actually beginning to panic. My mind was playing terrible tricks on me. It seemed as though the voice was all around me, constantly yelling, constantly screaming. Up ahead was the main road, Whirple Road to be precise, well, light busy. I could hail a cab and be home in minutes. But the voice is the immensity. "I hate you. You coward." Every second, all around me, the adrenaline must have been heightening my every sense. I admit I was scared, and it seemed as though for some reason that terrible voice was booming off every surface on the Est. It felt as though I was simultaneously running away and into that mad rage. The words felt like gusts of a terrible hot wind, pushing its venomous anger at me. I couldn't take it anymore. The voice seemed to make me share that same intense anger. I thought to myself, am I the one shouting? And I felt like a victim. I wanted to kill the people that were playing this mad trick on me. I felt the hatred. Time to die, coward. I hate you. I decided I had to give up. In one quick moment, I decided I would stop running as fast as I could and have a cigarette and wait for these people to show themselves. Come what may, I needed answers. And a smoke. I quickly stopped my run and spun around. The car beeped as it raced past exactly where I would have run to had I not stopped at exact moment. I felt its air pocket ruffle the back of my hair as it sped past. In my blind panic, I had run past the sidewalk of the main road and onto the actual road. I had avoided running blindly into the road and being run down by inches. I looked up the road I had come from. Darkness, silence. Whoever had been up there was now gone. I lighted my cigarette and took a few moments to calm down. Smoking had saved my life that day, friends. I went home after that. Nothing more happened to me. But as I was standing there trying to calm down, working through the panic and adrenaline, I seemed to remember I felt like I heard a soft whisper. Perhaps just my imagination. I thought I heard a girl's voice softly saying, "Not such a coward after all." I couldn't help but remember what happened a few years ago on Halloween. Though I'm not a firm believer in supernatural things, it's events like this that make me look back and question, up until this point in my life, what I've thought to be true and what I've believed to be false. This happened 4 years ago on Halloween. I was sitting on the sofa in my apartment, relaxing with my laptop, waiting for kids to come knock on my door, as I usually did. Being too old to trick or treat, but not a fan of parties. However, this year I just moved to a new apartment, which was farther away from the larger homes I lived near before, and fewer kids seemed to be in the area. One of the reasons was that it was an apartment complex for single guys, and was far enough from my college that people who lived here had to drive to school. Still, I had a small bucket of candy prepared, as usual, which I had been snacking from. The apartments on both sides of me are usually quiet. Nobody lives in the apartment above mine. So far, the evening was just hours of silence and occasional music from my laptop. It was almost 7 o'clock, and still not a single person had come by for candy. I suddenly realized that I might have left the outside light off. I wasn't used to my apartment yet, so I opened the door and looked outside to check. It was off. No wonder nobody had come by. I flipped the switch on and looked back outside to see if people were there. I couldn't see anyone walking around, but it was dark and the complex was large, so I didn't think much of it. I closed the door and started walking back to the sofa. Knock, knock, knock. That was fast, I thought. I walked back to the sofa, stopped the music playing on my laptop, and picked up the bowl of candy, then walked back and opened the door. A young dark-skinned boy, probably around 10 years old at most, stood there by himself, with what looked like white flour sprinkled all over the top of his head. He was wearing a SpongeBob shirt, I remember, and didn't seem to be in a costume, nor dressed unusually, except for the white flour in his short hair and on his forehead. He didn't say trick or treat, but he looked up at me and seemed irritated for some reason. "Can I use your bathroom?" His voice was monotone, almost like he was trying to fake a robot voice. I smiled, a bit shocked that my first visitor was this kid, and he didn't even want any candy. "Sure, but be quick." He ran inside past me and closed the bathroom door, locking it behind him. I decided to keep the front door open and stand next to it while I waited for him to finish, holding the bowl of candy while looking to see if anyone else was coming toward my apartment. 10 minutes later, and nobody had come by, and the boy was still in my bathroom. Knock, knock, knock. Are you okay? There wasn't an answer, but I could hear him walking around behind the door. The water faucet turned a tiny bit. It was just streaming softly. I waited by the door. 2 minutes later, and the water was still running. My front door was open, and it was dark outside except for the glow from my porch light. Knock, knock, knock. Can you come out for a second? I started worrying if the boy was all right or if he was playing some kind of prank. After all, it was Halloween. Knock, knock, knock. I'm opening the door. I knew it was locked, but I tried wiggling the handle to see if maybe it would budge. The water was running, but I couldn't hear anything else from behind the door. Knock, knock, knock. Can you open the door? I need to use the bathroom, I said, using that as an excuse. I was starting to panic a little inside. Maybe he was hurt? Knock, knock, knock. No answer. Now I'm worrying. I ran my shoulder into the door once, wondering if what I see people do in crime dramas really works or not. It really hurt. I tried it again and again and again. I tried kicking the door. At this point, I'm freaking out. The bathroom didn't have a key, so there was no way to open it. I'm calling the police. Actually, I was worried if the police would even show up in a reasonable amount of time on Halloween. I called them anyway, and they said they were in the neighborhood and could be right over. While they drove over, I explained on the phone what was going on. When they arrived, I ran outside and unlocked the complex gate, then followed them back into my apartment. The 2 officers arrived, heard the water running, and started kicking at the door. One of them had a crowbar, but they didn't need to use it. My cheap wooden bathroom door was open in a few solid kicks. It shot open, spraying paint dust and with chips everywhere. The first thing I saw when the door opened was the water faucet, still running. Then I saw both of the officers pull out their radios at the same time and enter the bathroom. I ran up behind them to see what had happened, but the officers' figures were blocking the view. "Oh boy," I heard one of them say. Now I was freaked out. I couldn't talk. I was already uncomfortable in my new apartment. I didn't want to have a memory of finding a dead boy in my bathroom. Both officers were shuffling around in the bathroom. Then they stepped out and put their radios away. They just looked at me sternly, and then one of them sighed. I'm not sure what to say. I'm going to let you off with a warning, because it's Halloween. My mind was filled with nothing but confusion and fear. I couldn't even look back at the officers after seeing their expressions. I'll have one of our guys give you a call tomorrow to discuss this. For now, don't be calling us up anymore tonight. Then they walked out the front door. One of them turned back to look at me and left the door open. In my panic, I ran into the bathroom. The floor was covered with tiny white wood chips from the door. The faucet was off. I didn't even realize the officers had turned it off. Nothing was there. Nothing else was touched. The next morning I got a call from a woman. I was certain when I answered the phone I was going to be in trouble, but what followed shocked me. I was going to call you in regards to prank phone calling this morning, but after reading the report the police gave me, I'm not too surprised this happened in the first place. Was what I heard. This is the apartment manager, by the way. We had the same call from someone in that apartment 5 years ago for a similar thing. Maybe you can ask the police about more details. But simply put, when we used to be family housing, a boy died in that bathroom 7 years ago. They say he drowned in the bathtub. I couldn't say anything. Happened 7 years ago. and after they left, the next residents called the police a couple years later, saying they heard a boy locked in their bathroom and wanted us to come up. When we got there, it was empty. So it was a ghost, was all I could ask. I'm not saying anything. I don't know about all that. I'm just saying it's not the first time. But the whole bathroom's been remodeled completely since then. It was a long time ago. The call continued, and we talked about some other things, mostly unrelated to the event of the previous night. I hung up and was feeling a bit shaken. Nothing else happened that day. I decided I'd better call someone to fix the door. The apartment manager told me that she'd pay for it, then jokingly told me not to let any more kids use it. I tried as hard as I could to smile over the phone. The next day, the repair company came by. They called me on my cell phone, and I jogged outside to let them in. Right then, it felt like my insides were hit with a rock. I suddenly remembered that my apartment complex had a gate. Nobody without a key could enter. No wonder there were no people trick or treating at my apartment. It was a singles apartment. No kids lived there, and no kids could have entered. You've made it to the end, but remember, the story doesn't always end when the video does. If you'd like to support the channel, please like, share, and subscribe. We'll meet again. Until then, take care.